The most dangerous words a man in power can hear are not, "You're under arrest. There, I'll see you in court." The morning air outside the Jefferson Federal Courthouse carried the crisp bite of late October as attorneys hurried through the marble entrance with leather briefcases tucked beneath their arms and reporters clustered around the front steps, hoping for the next headline that would dominate the evening news. Security officers greeted familiar faces with practiced nods while the steady rhythm of polished shoes echoed across the granite plaza. Everything about the building projected authority, order, and respect for the law. At least that was the illusion. Standing quietly near the courthouse entrance was a tall black man dressed in a perfectly pressed white dress shirt tucked neatly into tailored black slacks. His polished black shoes reflected the pale morning sunlight, and a simple silver watch rested beneath the cuff of his sleeve. There was nothing flashy about him. No military ribbons. No expensive suit. No visible badge announcing status. He carried only a slim leather portfolio and the calm confidence of someone who had spent an entire lifetime mastering the discipline of patience. His name was Jerome Bennett, though not a single person passing him recognized it. Some assumed he was another attorney. Others thought he might be a witness waiting for instructions. A few barely noticed him at all. Jerome simply glanced toward the courthouse clock before checking the time on his watch. 8:53. 7 minutes remained before one of the most important hearings scheduled inside the federal courthouse that year. His expression never changed. Across the street, Officer Tyler Dawson stepped out of his patrol vehicle with the swagger of someone who believed the uniform on his shoulders granted him unquestionable authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky, Tyler scanned the entrance with restless eyes. He had worked courthouse security for nearly 6 years, and somewhere along the way, confidence had quietly hardened into arrogance. To him, appearances often spoke louder than facts. As he approached the entrance, his attention fixed on Jerome. The neatly dressed black man, standing alone, somehow triggered an instinct Tyler never questioned. Instead of walking past, he slowed. His jaw tightened. Several visitors entering the courthouse noticed the officer changing direction and instinctively glanced toward Jerome. Conversations softened. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Tyler stopped only a few feet away. "Sir," he said firmly, "I'm going to need to see some identification." Jerome looked up with calm eyes that revealed neither surprise nor irritation. Without rushing, he reached into his shirt pocket and calmly removed a wallet. Before he could fully open it, Tyler extended his hand. "Not so fast." The words carried more suspicion than professionalism. Jerome lowered his hand slightly and met the officer's gaze without hostility. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked in a measured voice. Tyler folded his arms. "I'll decide whether there's a problem." Several courthouse employees slowed their pace. A television cameraman nearby subtly turned his lens toward the growing interaction. Jerome remained completely composed, almost unusually so. He neither argued nor attempted to walk away. Instead, he quietly closed the wallet and slipped it back into his pocket. Tyler interpreted the movement as defiance. His posture stiffened. "Turn around," he ordered. "Place your hands behind your back." A ripple of whispers spread across the courthouse steps. Jerome slowly obeyed without resistance, his expression unchanged. As the metal handcuffs clicked gently into place, more than one bystander exchanged uneasy looks. Yet Jerome never raised his voice. He simply glanced toward the courthouse doors, then back at the officer standing behind him. A faint smile appeared on his face, calm enough to unsettle anyone paying close attention. Looking directly into Tyler Dawson's eyes, Jerome spoke only 5 quiet words. "I'll see you in court." The courthouse entrance, so lively only moments earlier, settled into an uneasy silence as Officer Tyler Dawson guided Jerome Bennett through the security checkpoint. Nobody rushed to intervene. Some watched with quiet curiosity, while others deliberately looked away, unwilling to become part of a scene that had already begun attracting attention. Jerome walked with measured steps, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing steady, never once asking why he had been singled out. The calmness in his demeanor felt almost out of place against the growing tension surrounding him. Tyler noticed it too, although he interpreted it as confidence that needed to be challenged rather than respected. Inside the courthouse, the polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of overhead lights and the familiar sounds of ringing elevators, rolling evidence carts, and distant conversations blended into the routine rhythm of another busy federal morning. Attorneys reviewed legal briefs as they hurried toward courtrooms. Families waited nervously outside hearing rooms, hoping for good news. Uniformed deputies exchanged greetings with clerks who had worked beside them for years. It was a building designed to represent fairness, yet assumptions often entered long before evidence ever did. Tyler stopped beside the security desk and nodded toward Jerome. A younger deputy looked up from his computer, clearly expecting a routine explanation. Instead, Tyler simply said, "I need him held until I finish verifying a few things." The deputy glanced at Jerome, then back at Tyler. "What is the issue?" Tyler shrugged. "Something does not feel right." The answer lingered awkwardly in the air because it was not really an answer at all. Jerome remained silent. He understood that arguing at this moment would accomplish nothing. Throughout his decades serving within the military justice system, he had learned that character often revealed itself most clearly when people believed nobody important was watching. Across the lobby, an elderly veteran carrying a folded American flag paused as he recognized Jerome's face. His eyes widened for a brief second before Jerome offered the smallest shake of his head. The veteran hesitated, then quietly continued walking without saying a word. Tyler never noticed the exchange. His attention had shifted toward Jerome's leather portfolio resting on the security counter. "What is inside?" he demanded. "Legal documents," Jerome answered calmly. "They're scheduled to be presented this morning." Tyler placed one hand on the portfolio but did not open it. Instead, he leaned slightly closer. "You expect me to believe you just happened to show up carrying legal documents into a federal courthouse?" Jerome met his eyes without the slightest hint of fear. "I expect nothing," he replied. "Facts usually speak for themselves." Those words somehow irritated Tyler, even more than an argument would have. Before he could respond, the courthouse clock chimed 9 o'clock. Throughout the building, courtroom doors began opening as judges prepared to take the bench. Clerks gathered case files. Court reporters adjusted microphones. Somewhere on the third floor, a bailiff quietly announced that an important proceeding would begin shortly, but one essential participant had not yet arrived. Staff members exchanged puzzled looks as schedules were checked again and again. Outside courtroom 4, Judge Susan Whitaker reviewed the morning docket one final time before glancing toward the hallway. "Has Judge Bennett checked in yet?" she asked her courtroom clerk. The clerk frowned while scanning the attendance list. "No, Your Honor. We have not heard from him." Judge Whitaker looked toward the courthouse entrance with growing concern. Jerome Bennett had never once arrived late in more than 2 decades of public service, not even by a single minute. Judge Susan Whitaker rarely checked the hallway twice before a hearing, but this morning felt different. She looked at the courtroom clock again. 9 minutes had passed since the scheduled start, and the seat reserved for the military judiciary remained empty. Attorneys whispered among themselves, wondering what could have delayed the one man whose reputation for punctuality had become legendary throughout the federal court system. Even the court reporter paused from organizing her notes, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Meanwhile, only a few hundred feet away, Jerome Bennett remained seated in a quiet security office beside the courthouse lobby. The metal cuffs still rested around his wrists, but his posture never changed. His leather portfolio remained untouched on the counter, exactly where Tyler Dawson had left it. Jerome glanced toward the office window, watching courthouse employees move through the lobby with increasing urgency. Every passing minute brought the building closer to confusion, yet he appeared completely at peace. Tyler stood outside the office, speaking with another officer. "Nobody just walks into a federal courthouse carrying confidential documents without answering questions," he insisted. "Something about him does not add up." The other officer looked uncertain. Did you run his identification? Tyler hesitated for a moment before answering. I will get to that. The younger officer frowned slightly. Would it not make sense to verify who he is first? Tyler dismissed the suggestion with a wave of his hand. Experience tells me when something is wrong. Those words sounded convincing only to himself. Inside the security office, Jerome quietly listened without reacting. Years of military service had taught him that impatience often exposed weaknesses more effectively than confrontation ever could. He folded his hands comfortably and waited. His calm presence slowly began affecting everyone around him. The deputy assigned to monitor the room found himself studying Jerome with growing curiosity. There was no nervous movement, no raised voice, no frustration, only remarkable composure, as though the outcome had already been decided long before anyone else realized it. Back upstairs, Judge Whitaker stepped into the hallway and addressed her clerk once more. Call chambers again. The clerk quickly reached for the courthouse telephone, but before the call could be completed, another clerk hurried down the corridor carrying a folder against her chest. Your Honor, she said quietly, the Department of Defense liaison is asking whether Judge Bennett has arrived. Judge Whitaker stopped walking. They are already asking? The clerk nodded. They said today's proceeding cannot begin without him. Several attorneys standing nearby exchanged confused glances. They had expected an important hearing, but the mention of the Department of Defense immediately elevated the significance of the morning. Downstairs, Tyler finally picked up Jerome's wallet from the evidence tray. Let us see who you really are, he muttered. He opened it expecting an ordinary driver's license and perhaps a courthouse visitor pass. Instead, he found multiple professionally issued identification cards arranged with exceptional precision. Before he could examine them carefully, his portable radio crackled to life. Officer Dawson, report immediately to courtroom 4. Tyler pressed the transmit button. I am occupied. The dispatcher answered almost instantly. Negative. Judge Whitaker specifically requested every available courthouse officer. An essential participant is missing, and federal officials are requesting immediate updates. Tyler looked toward Jerome with growing irritation rather than concern. He can wait another few minutes, he said under his breath. Jerome slowly lifted his eyes from the floor and looked directly at the officer. His voice remained calm, almost reassuring. Sometimes a few minutes change everything. Tyler scoffed, closed the wallet without studying the identification any further, and turned toward the hallway, completely unaware that the answer to every question filling the courthouse had been sitting quietly in front of him since 8:53 that morning. The unanswered questions began spreading through the courthouse faster than any official announcement could. Clerks quietly compared schedules. Court officers checked hallways that had already been searched twice. Even the attorneys waiting inside courtroom 4 had stopped reviewing their notes, replacing legal arguments with whispered speculation. Judge Susan Whitaker maintained her composure from the bench, but every glance toward the courtroom entrance revealed growing concern. She had served on the federal bench for nearly 20 years, and never once had Jerome Bennett failed to appear without advance notice. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. Downstairs, the security office remained almost unnaturally quiet. Jerome Bennett sat exactly where he had been instructed, his white dress shirt still perfectly pressed despite the unexpected delay. His leather portfolio rested untouched on the counter a few feet away. Inside that portfolio were documents prepared over several months, each page carefully organized for a hearing that carried national significance. Yet Jerome showed no sign of anxiety about missing the proceeding. Instead, his attention drifted toward the courthouse clock mounted above the hallway entrance. Every passing minute seemed to confirm something only he understood. The deputy assigned to watch him finally broke the silence. You are taking this surprisingly well. Jerome smiled politely. Experience teaches you that panic rarely improves the truth. The deputy nodded slowly. Most people would be demanding answers by now. Jerome answered without hesitation. Most people believe every problem must be solved immediately. Some problems solve themselves when everyone has enough time to reveal who they truly are. The words lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. Outside the office, Tyler Dawson continued, defending his decision to several fellow officers. "I follow my instincts," he insisted. "That is what good police work requires." One officer crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Instinct matters, but verification matters more." Tyler dismissed the comment. "If I waited for paperwork every time something looked suspicious, I would not be doing my job." Before anyone could continue the discussion, another courthouse employee hurried past carrying a stack of files. "Federal representatives are arriving," she announced while continuing toward the elevators. "They want answers immediately." Tyler watched her disappear down the hallway before glancing back toward the security office. For the first time that morning, a faint uncertainty crossed his face. Upstairs, the atmosphere inside courtroom 4 had shifted completely. A United States flag stood motionless behind the bench, while empty seats seemed louder than the conversations filling the room. Judge Whitaker quietly leaned toward her clerk. "Contact the United States Marshals Service." The clerk immediately reached for the telephone. Within moments, messages traveled through multiple agencies. Calls reached administrative offices. Security supervisors reviewed entry logs. Building cameras were checked. Yet every search produced the same confusing result. Jerome Bennett had entered the courthouse on schedule. After that, his trail appeared to stop. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse entrance, 3 dark government vehicles rolled slowly to the curb. Their arrival immediately caught the attention of reporters standing on the front steps. Uniformed military personnel stepped out first, followed by several senior officials dressed in conservative business attire. They entered the building with calm professionalism rather than urgency, but their presence instantly changed the mood inside the lobby. Conversations stopped. Security personnel instinctively stood straighter. Even experienced courthouse employees recognized that visitors of this level did not appear without extraordinary reason. The deputy inside the security office noticed the sudden silence outside and looked through the narrow window in the door. "Someone important just arrived," he murmured. Jerome did not even turn his head. Instead, he looked once more at the courthouse clock before quietly folding his hands together. His expression remained exactly as it had been since the beginning of the morning, steady, patient, and completely untroubled, as though every unexpected delay had simply become another page in a story whose ending he had already read the moment the government delegation entered the courthouse. The atmosphere shifted from routine uncertainty to disciplined urgency. Conversations ended in mid-sentence. Security supervisors straightened their jackets. Administrative staff quietly stepped aside to clear the hallway. At the front of the group walked Captain Emily Foster, her calm expression revealing years of military leadership. Beside her was United States Marshal David Sullivan, whose measured stride carried the confidence of someone accustomed to handling matters of national importance. Neither appeared angry. Neither appeared rushed. Their professionalism alone commanded attention. Judge Susan Whitaker stepped into the hallway to greet them personally. "Captain Foster," she said, with visible relief, "we have been trying to locate Judge Bennett for nearly 30 minutes. Emily nodded once. "We know." Her answer was brief, but it carried enough weight to silence everyone standing nearby. David Sullivan unfolded a small notebook before looking directly at the courthouse security supervisor. "We need a complete timeline beginning the moment Judge Bennett entered this building." The supervisor immediately directed staff members toward surveillance monitors and electronic entry logs. Every camera angle was reviewed. Every security checkpoint was documented. Within minutes, the timeline became unmistakably clear. Jerome Bennett had entered the courthouse at 8:53 in the morning carrying a leather portfolio. He had spoken politely with no one except the officer who approached him near the entrance. Every camera after that showed only one consistent fact. He never left the building. David studied the footage carefully before asking one simple question. Who was the officer? A nervous silence settled over the security office. One supervisor slowly answered, Officer Tyler Dawson. Tyler, who had been standing several feet away, immediately stepped forward with confidence that had not yet begun to fade. I conducted a lawful detention while verifying suspicious circumstances. David looked at him without expression. What suspicious circumstances? Tyler paused for only a second. His behavior seemed unusual. Captain Foster exchanged a brief glance with David, but said nothing. Instead, she requested the incident report. Tyler handed over a partially completed document. Emily read every line carefully. There were descriptions of observations, but no verified evidence supporting the detention. No confirmation of identity. No documentation showing that Jerome Bennett's credentials had ever been examined. She closed the report slowly. Did you inspect his identification? Tyler hesitated. Not completely. Did you search the portfolio? No. Did you contact court administration before delaying his arrival? Tyler lowered his voice slightly. No. Around them, several officers quietly looked toward the floor. David Sullivan spoke. Next, his tone remaining remarkably calm. Officer Dawson, are you aware that today's hearing cannot legally begin without Judge Bennett? Tyler frowned. I understand someone important is missing. David looked directly into his eyes. Someone important was never missing. Those words lingered in the hallway like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. Tyler's confidence began giving way to uncertainty as he watched Captain Foster remove a sealed envelope from a briefcase. Inside was the official hearing order bearing multiple federal authorizations. The first page displayed a formal judicial appointment signed months earlier. Beneath the government seal appeared a familiar name in bold letters. Jerome Bennett, Chief Military Judge, led judicial authority for the Special Federal Review Panel. Tyler stared silently at the document as recognition slowly replaced assumption. Before anyone spoke another word, the deputy assigned to the downstairs security office hurried toward the group. Excuse me, he said carefully. The gentleman downstairs has remained completely cooperative the entire time. He asked for nothing. He simply said that eventually everyone would discover the truth for themselves. Captain Foster offered the faintest smile before turning toward the staircase. Then let us not keep Judge Bennett waiting any longer. As Jerome Bennett entered courtroom 4, every conversation dissolved into complete silence. Attorneys who had been reviewing thick binders quietly closed them. Reporters lowered their cameras for a brief moment, sensing that the most important story of the day had already changed before the hearing had even begun. Judge Susan Whitaker rose from the bench, followed immediately by the courtroom staff. All rise, the bailiff announced with unmistakable clarity. The words echoed across the courtroom as every person stood. Jerome acknowledged the room with a respectful nod before taking his place at the center of the judicial panel. His white dress shirt, still perfectly pressed despite the unexpected delay, reflected the bright courtroom lights. There was nothing dramatic about his appearance. His authority came not from decorations or ceremony, but from decades of earned respect. Captain Emily Foster quietly delivered the leather portfolio to the clerk's desk, while United States Marshal David Sullivan took a position near the courtroom entrance. Tyler Dawson remained in the back of the courtroom, uncertain whether he should leave or stay. Nobody instructed him either way. For the first time since putting on his uniform that morning, he felt completely invisible. Jerome carefully opened his portfolio and arranged several folders before looking toward Judge Whitaker. "Thank you for your patience," he said calmly. "We may begin." His voice carried across the courtroom with remarkable composure. There was no trace of frustration over the delay, no public criticism, no attempt to embarrass anyone. The hearing officially opened, but before addressing the scheduled matter, Judge Whitaker spoke quietly. "Your Honor, there is one procedural issue that must be acknowledged before today's proceedings continue." Jerome nodded. "Proceed." She glanced briefly toward the courtroom clerk, who activated the display system connected to the courthouse security network. A series of timestamps appeared on the large courtroom monitor. 8:53 in the morning. Entry confirmed. Security checkpoint. Courthouse lobby. Security office. Every movement had been recorded by the building's cameras. The courtroom watched in complete silence as the footage played. There were no dramatic confrontations, no raised voices, only a calm man answering questions respectfully while an officer repeatedly chose assumption over verification. The recording showed Jerome presenting his wallet. It showed that his identification was never fully examined. It showed his portfolio remaining unopened despite repeated references to legal documents. It also showed every minute that passed while the scheduled hearing waited upstairs. When the recording ended, the room remained silent for several long seconds. Judge Whitaker looked toward Tyler Dawson. "Officer Dawson, do you dispute the accuracy of this footage?" Tyler slowly stood. His shoulders no longer carried the confidence they had displayed earlier that morning. "No, Your Honor." "Do you dispute the official entry records?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you dispute that Judge Bennett fully cooperated throughout the encounter?" Tyler lowered his eyes. "No, Your Honor." Jerome remained completely still, listening without interruption. He never smiled. He never celebrated. His attention remained fixed on the principle that had brought everyone into the courtroom in the first place. "Facts." Judge Whitaker folded her hands together before speaking again. "This court exists because evidence must always outweigh assumptions. Every person who enters these doors deserves the same standard, regardless of appearance, profession, or background." Several members of the audience quietly nodded. The lesson reached far beyond the legal community. It reached every person who had ever mistaken confidence for certainty or appearance for proof. Jerome finally looked toward Tyler, not with anger, but with quiet sincerity. "The law protects its integrity one decision at a time," he said. "Today was never about proving who I was. It was about remembering how every person should be treated before anyone knows who they are." No one in the courtroom could argue with those words because the evidence displayed moments earlier had already spoken more clearly than any accusation ever could. When the hearing concluded, no applause followed. No one celebrated. The quiet inside the courtroom carried far more weight than any dramatic reaction ever could. Every person present understood they had witnessed something larger than a procedural mistake. They had watched assumptions collapse under the simple strength of verified facts. Judge Susan Whitaker recessed the proceedings for a brief administrative review while court staff organized the official record. Captain Emily Foster remained near the bench, speaking quietly with United States Marshal David Sullivan. Together, they reviewed the security footage, the incident report, and the courthouse entry logs one final time. Each document confirmed the same conclusion. The delay had never resulted from incomplete information. It resulted from incomplete judgment. Tyler Dawson remained standing near the rear of the courtroom long after everyone else had resumed their seats. His uniform looked exactly the same as it had earlier that morning, yet somehow felt heavier. Every confident explanation he had offered outside the courthouse now echoed differently inside his own mind. He remembered Jerome calmly offering identification. He remembered choosing not to examine it. He remembered deciding that instinct alone was enough. Those decisions, insignificant when made one at a time, now formed an unmistakable chain that everyone in the courtroom could clearly see. David Sullivan approached Tyler with measured professionalism rather than anger. "Officer Dawson," he said quietly, "effective immediately, this matter will be forwarded for administrative review under established departmental procedures." Tyler nodded once. He did not argue. "Will I have an opportunity to provide my statement?" David answered without hesitation. "Every employee deserves due process. The same standard applies to everyone." Tyler slowly looked across the courtroom toward Jerome Bennett, who was carefully organizing documents for the next phase of the hearing. The judge had never asked for punishment. He had never demanded an apology in front of the room. Instead, he had trusted the process he had spent his career protecting. That realization unsettled Tyler more than any public criticism could have. After several moments, Tyler walked forward until he stood a respectful distance from a bench. His voice was noticeably quieter than it had been that morning. "Judge Bennett." Jerome looked up. "Yes, officer." Tyler took a slow breath before speaking again. I made decisions before I had the facts. There is no excuse for that. I cannot change what happened this morning, but I can acknowledge that I was wrong." The courtroom remained completely silent. Jerome studied him for a brief moment before responding. Accountability begins the moment a person stops defending a mistake and starts learning from it. Tyler listened carefully. Jerome continued in the same calm tone. "Every badge represents public trust. That trust grows stronger when people have the courage to examine their own decisions honestly." Tyler nodded again, understanding that the conversation was not about humiliation. It was about responsibility. Around the courtroom, several younger officers quietly observed the exchange. They had expected anger. Instead, they witnessed professionalism meeting humility. Captain Emily Foster later remarked to one of the deputies, "Leadership is measured most clearly on difficult days." Those simple words stayed with everyone who heard them. As court staff finalized the official record, the security footage and written reports were preserved according to standard federal procedure. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was exaggerated. The evidence would speak exactly as it had throughout the day. Jerome closed his portfolio and prepared to resume the hearing that had been delayed by nearly an hour. Before turning back toward the bench, he paused for just a moment and looked across the courtroom. "Justice does not become stronger when one person falls," he said. "It becomes stronger when every person remembers that fairness must come before assumptions." No one questioned those words, because by the end of that morning, everyone in the courtroom understood that the greatest authority was never found in a title or a uniform. It was found in the discipline to treat every human being with equal dignity before the truth had even finished introducing itself late that afternoon. The golden light of the setting sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows, replacing the tension of the morning with a quiet sense of reflection. Courtroom 4 had completed its final matter of the day, and the last attorneys gathered their files before disappearing into the hallway. Reporters packed away their cameras, but many of them left carrying a story far different from the one they had expected to cover. The headlines would mention an unexpected delay and an administrative review. Yet those who had been inside the courtroom understood that the real story had never been about official titles. It had been about the choices people make before they know who stand in front of them. Jerome Bennett remained alone for a few moments inside the now empty courtroom. He carefully closed his portfolio, straightened the papers inside, and looked across the rows of vacant seats. Years of service had taught him that justice was rarely remembered because of dramatic speeches. More often, it was remembered because ordinary moments revealed extraordinary character. This morning had been one of those moments. Judge Susan Whitaker quietly entered the courtroom carrying a single folder. "Everything has been completed," she said. "The hearing record has been finalized, and the administrative review has officially begun." Jerome nodded appreciatively. "Thank you." She hesitated before asking one final question. "You never told anyone who you were when you had the chance." "What?" Jerome looked toward the American flag, standing beside the bench before answering. "Because respect that depends on identity is not respect at all. If people only choose fairness after discovering a title, then fairness has already arrived too late." Judge Whitaker smiled gently, understanding that the lesson would remain with everyone who had witnessed the day unfold. Outside the courthouse, Tyler Dawson stood alone near the front steps as employees slowly made their way home. His patrol vehicle remained parked exactly where he had left it that morning, but he did not immediately walk toward it. Instead, he watched families leave the courthouse together, attorneys helping elderly clients down the stairs, deputies holding doors open for complete strangers, and courthouse staff wishing one another a safe evening. Simple acts of respect suddenly appeared far more important than they had only hours earlier. Tyler quietly removed his sunglasses and looked back at the courthouse entrance one last time. He understood that rebuilding trust would require more than words. It would require different decisions, repeated every single day. As Jerome exited the building a few minutes later, their eyes met briefly across the wide granite plaza. Tyler offered a respectful nod. Jerome returned it without hesitation before continuing toward the parking lot. Neither man spoke. Nothing more needed to be said. Some lessons are most powerful when silence carries them forward. The courthouse gradually emptied, as the evening sky turned shades of orange and deep blue. The marble steps that had witnessed confusion that morning now stood peaceful beneath the fading light. Tomorrow another crowd would arrive. New cases would be heard. Different lives would cross those same hallways. Yet the lesson from that single morning would remain long after every document had been archived. Every badge represents responsibility before authority. Every courtroom exists because evidence must stand above assumption. Every person deserves dignity before explanation. And sometimes the quietest voice in the room becomes the one that changes everyone else. Jerome Bennett never needed to raise his voice to remind an entire courthouse what justice truly looked like. He simply lived the principle he had sworn to protect. As the courthouse lights slowly illuminated against the evening sky, one truth lingered long after every door had closed. The strongest measure of justice is not how we treat the powerful after we recognize them. It is how we treat the stranger before we know who they are. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of justice.